Hi, I'm Kirk Bevins, and you're listening to the weekly Dartscast. 177!
Hello, and welcome to a new episode of the weekly Dartscast in association with Darts Corner. I'm Alex Moss, and once again, I'm joined by my co-host, the Darts statistician, and some might say no longer the Darts Strava King after my antics at the weekend. Burton, DeWitt, how are you doing?
Well, I mean, it was raining here, so I couldn't go for a run. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any competition. And I did just sneak in a cheeky 4.5 mile run right before we started recording. Work through my lunch break, so I have time for that. So maybe you're a little premature there, but I'm doing just fine. How are you, Alex?
I'm doing all right, thank you. Glad to have the crown for 1 week at least, but I do expect you to reclaim it by the time we record again next week. But before then, let's get into this week's show, and lots to get to. We're going to be looking back at the last Euro Tour of the year in a moment, as well as the last Women's Series action of 2023. And we're going to be joined by two players who grabbed some of those headlines in Wigan over the weekend. Natalie Gilbert, the newest title winner on the Women's Series, she's going to be joining us, and we'll also be joined by Aoife McCormack, who made her first final at the weekend as well. We've got a load of your listener questions to answer as well in the mailbag, but let's start the show with a look back at events in Hildesheim over the weekend, and Ricardo Pietreczko becoming only the second German player to win a PDC senior title, beating Peter Wright 8-4 in Sunday night's final to win the German Darts Championship. And we're going to go straight into our question of the week, which we posed to our listeners at the start of the week, and it's off the back of Ricardo's title win. Our question of the week, of course, sponsored by Condor Darts. We asked our listeners who will be the first German player to reach a PDC major final. The options: Gabriel Clemens, Martin Schindler, Sunday's winner Ricardo Pietreczko, or other. Who are you going for?
Ooh, I mean, maybe we should get Condor Airlines to sponsor the question as well, since we're talking about German darts here. It's a German-based airline for those who don't know. But yeah, that's a tough question. And, before this week, I don't think we would have said Ricardo Pietreczko because, well, obviously he's emerged this year. He hadn't clinched his spot in the European Championship before this, but he was provisionally in. And even if he'd lost his first match, the way results ended up going, he would have qualified anyway. He just missed out on the World Grand Prix. And he kept getting better and better, and we were seeing more and more of him, and he certainly had bottle. He certainly had grit. And I think we knew he was a player who was on the up and at some point would be likely to take the next step. But what was that next step? Was it making a final? Was it qualifying for big television events, winning a few matches in a big televised event? That's probably what we were thinking. We weren't thinking it was winning a European tour. We weren't thinking it would be throwing in a 10-dart leg against the darts in a last leg decider against someone who once won 20 consecutive last leg deciders on the European tour, a winner of 36 European tour events in Michael van Guren. We didn't think he would beat a two-time former world champion in Peter Wright in the final. That seemed like 3 more steps beyond where he had been. Not that he didn't have the talent, but he wasn't there yet. But he did it. And he was impressive. And he might not have been the best player the entire weekend, but he was the most determined. He was the most flawless. 8 out of 8 in the doubles in the finals. 14 consecutive doubles hit. That's absurd. Just going 8 out of 8 in the final. If you think of a double as a 40% possibility each time, getting 8 of them in a row is less than half of 1%, or just slightly more than half of 1% of the time we'll see that. And he did that. And that was on back of making 6 more of those. It was just phenomenal. Will he do it on television? Will he be the first German player to reach a PDC major final? That's the question. And I don't know, but he's definitely in the conversation. Gabriel Clemens, he's made a televised final on a World Series event. He's been around for a while. He has the game. He's regressed a little bit this year, but we're starting to see him get back. We're starting to see him get results again and be the force that he once was. But I don't think he's where he was a year ago. He's not playing as consistently at that time, but I think he's good enough to get back there. Martin Schindler, well, he just made his second major quarterfinal at the World Grand Prix a week ago. He's been consistently getting into the money end of all the non-televised events and being a force to be reckoned with more often in the televised events. He's right there in the conversation. But now so is Ricardo Pietreczko. But they're not the only ones. We haven't seen that much of Pascal Ruprecht yet, but he's a young player, won his tour card this year. We know he has oodles and oodles of talent. And with a couple more years on tour, he'll be in that conversation as well. I don't want to write off Max Hopp. Max Hopp has fallen off the tour. It's been a dark couple years in his terms of performances, but he had won a Euro Tour before 5.5 years ago, won another Players Championship event, moved into the top 32, qualified for a pair of world match plays, and was really playing at a level that on his correct week, he could have broken through. I think we'll see him again. I don't think we've seen the last of Max Hopp. There's a lot of talent in German darts right now, and I'm sure there's another 3, 4, 5 players we didn't even mention, who we haven't even seen yet, who once we do see are going to be a force to be reckoned with themselves. But the question is, who will be the first? And will it be one of these three? I think at least one of these three will make a final at some point. And I'm going to go with Martin Schindler. I just think Schindler keeps putting that little bit more on his game year in, year out. Falling off the tour for a year was the best thing that could have happened for him because it made him step back. It made him figure out what he wanted out of darts, what he thought he could get, and what he needed to do to get there. And that's not to say that before that his game wasn't in the right place. He was always a player who gave the most out of what he had on a given day. But the confidence had definitely gone by the time he'd fallen off the tour. And to fall off for a year and to regather everything, I think did him a world of good. And he is a much better player now. And he knows now that if a bad spell comes, it's just a bad spell because he's a top 16 player, at the very least a top 32 player, which is why he's in the top 32. But I think he's a top 16 player and he knows that. And he can handle a down month. He can handle a bad tournament. And I think that level of professionalism is going to get him over the line and into a major final first. So I'm going to go Martin Schindler. But I think that it could be any of these three. It could be someone else. And it would not surprise me if all three of them at some point in the future make a major final.
Yeah, definitely. And it's an interesting question to debate. And it's got a lot more interesting, you got to say, after the weekend that we've just had with Ricardo Pietreczko winning that Euro Tour title. And looking at the poll at the moment on Twitter, do go and have your say on there. 37% are agreeing with you, Burton. They're going with Martin Schindler. 33% are going with the winner at the weekend, Ricardo Pietreczko, and 21% Gabriel Clemens. 9% going with other. Maybe they're thinking Max Hopp. Maybe they're thinking of someone else. And we've had a comment from one of our listeners on YouTube, Boy You Crazy, that is their name, has said Pietreczko has so much time left in his career to reach one. I think very highly of Schindler as well, but he always seems to struggle to maintain form over the course of a tournament. That's their thoughts. And I agree with you. Before this past weekend, if we'd have run this poll, you were probably looking at Schindler and Clemens as the leading two in the poll, probably commanding the lion's share, maybe 80-85% of the vote between them. And they are both top 32 players now, well established in there. Clemens has been in the top 32 for best part of 3 years now, whereas as you mentioned with Martin Schindler coming back after losing his tour card, getting it back at Q School, and he's managed to get into that top 32 now as well. And I think the thing with those two players, surprisingly, is that between them, they've not won a senior title in the PDC yet. They've had some finals on the Pro Tour. They've had some big runs on TV, but they've not been able to do what Ricardo has done and win one of these titles. And you look at someone like Gabriel Clemens, and still less than 12 months ago, start of this year, we were talking about him getting to the semi-finals of the biggest tournament there is, Ali Pali, getting to the last four, and the way he dismantled Gerwyn Price in that quarter-final, who was the world number one at the time. So he's certainly a player that has got potential to do it, as does Martin Schindler as well. We've seen him get to a few quarterfinals in some of the major events this year as well. But we've got to talk more about Ricardo, because to produce that level of performance at the weekend, to win a Euro Tour and the way he did it as well, you mentioned some of the highlights there, the 10-darter in the decider against Michael van Gerwen in the semi-final. And then to follow it up, he surely would have been on a massive high after that. But to follow it up with a finishing display like he did in the final, 8 out of 8, and it's a huge step in the career. You mentioned about players, they make these steps, and with Ricardo Pietreczko, it does feel like he's made quite a few steps at one time there, just in that one evening. And we are going to see him in pretty much all the TV events now for the next 12 months. We're going to see him in the Grand Slam, the European Championship, Players' Championship Finals, World Championship, the Match Play, the Grand Prix. They're looking pretty good for him next year as well. So I can understand why a lot of our listeners are siding with Ricardo for this one, because the composure that he showed as well at the weekend was beyond his years of experience on the stage in the PDC. And I don't know where to put my vote. I think if you're a German darts fan, though, you've never had it better, have you? You've got two players in that top 32. You've now got a third player emerging in a big way like Ricardo Pietreczko is at the weekend. And I think all three have got a strong case to break that new ground. And I think they're all going to be pushing each other now to break that new ground. I think you've got Clemens and Schindler. They'll have watched what Ricardo did at the weekend. They'll be thinking, you know what, I've got the game to do that. I've beaten all these players before. I'm going to push myself even more now to try and emulate what he's done and go further. So, you know what, you went with Schindler. I'm going to go with Clemens. I think you can make a case for any of those three players, but I'm going to go with the player that the least amount of our listeners are going with at the moment. They've got a shorter percentage going with Clemens. So I'm going to back the man that was one game away from a world final not so long ago to get to a PDC major final first.
Well, congratulations then on either other or Ricardo Pietreczko being the first. Although I'm good at tips involving Pietreczko. If you remember 2 years ago at Q-School, I did tip him to come through.
You did, yes.
But the Euro Tour for 2023 came to a close, and the draw is now confirmed for the European Championships later this month in Dortmund. Early thoughts, though, on the draw?
Yes, it's quite an intriguing draw, and we touched on it during last week's show when we were looking forward to this last Euro Tour of the year. We mentioned that the draw would be finalised for the European Championship at the end of this weekend, and it's not disappointed. Wherever you look, there's some exciting matchups, and I might have said this before, but this tournament for me does feel like it goes under the radar a little bit. It can get lost amongst all the other big tournaments that are going on at this time of the year. We're only a few weeks off from the World Grand Prix. We've got the Grand Slam a month away. This event comes in between them. And to borrow one of your phrases, Burton, it's probably the least sexier of the three events when you put them all together. But when you see the lineup of players, the first round ties on offer, you can't help but get excited about it. And I think obviously a big interest in this draw was who Ross Smith would get as the defending champion from last year. And we've got to say, first of all, every credit to him on getting to this event in the first place, because he's had to do a lot of hard work away from the cameras. 8 of the 10 Euro Tours he's played in this year, he was a qualifier. He won through those tour card holder qualifiers, which are 2 events in a day, often come after 2 or 3 Players' Championship events. So they do take some winning and some stamina to get through those. And Ross, he's got into the field quite comfortably in the end, 19th seed. And the reward for me, an interesting clash there with the man of the moment right now, Ricardo Pietreczko, who's just won his first PDC title on the Euro Tour. So his confidence is going to be sky high, and fair to say he's going to go into that game with no fear. That's, for me, a tie to watch out for, to see, A, how does Ross get on in that first game of his title defence, and B, how is Ricardo going to fare in his first game back on stage after what was a memorable and life-changing win at the weekend. Away from that, I do want to save some of the games for you, so I'll pick one more from each of the other 3 quarters. That Smith-Pietreczko game, that's in the bottom quarter of the draw, working my way up the bracket. I think Dirk van Dijvenbode, James Wade would be my pick of the games from that third section, and 2 players that are looking to bounce back from some disappointments. Dirk was whitewashed at the weekend, and James Wade, as we've seen, dropping out of the world's top 16, ending a quite incredible run, 17 consecutive years in that top 16. So he's going to be wanting to bounce back as well. And just moving into that top half of the draw, the second quarter, tough to pick just one game, but I'm going to go with Rob Cross against Dimitri van den Berg, a clash of 2 former major winners, 2 top 16 players. Dimitri down at number 14 in the world, Rob Cross down at number 9. Both have obviously been a lot higher in the past, and Rob's title money from winning this event 2 years ago, that's already dropped off the rankings, so he's going to be looking to climb back up again. And as is Dimitri, he'll be wanting to make some strides back towards that top 10, top 8, and put himself in contention for the Premier League again next year. And lastly, top quarter again, difficult to pick one, but I'm going to give the nod for me to Dave Chisnell, Chris Dobey. Chizzy won 3 Euro Tours this year, a very deserved number 1 seed for this event. Chris Dobey snuck into the field on the last weekend, but don't let that fool you, because last year he was the 31st seed in this event, beat Michael van Gerwen in a last leg decider, and ended up making the semi-finals, beat Dave Chisnall on the way. I think it was the quarterfinals he beat him. So Chizzy, I think, is going to be out for revenge, because that was probably one of those events last year where you got to the final day, Chizzy was still in, and he might have been thinking, his fans might have been thinking, that could be the time for him to win that first one.
I'm not surprised that you said some of the matches on mine. I'm glad you saved me some. I did not actually have the Wade Dirk Van Dijvenbode match on here, not because I don't think it's a great match, because I think I could have made a case for pretty much all of these, because this is just, I mean, it's always the case now where the draw is always phenomenal because of just how deep and dense the quality is in darts. But I think there's a lot of just interesting storylines behind even the matches I don't have. I don't have Peter Wright, Gabriel Clemens on my list, but that's obviously an interesting one. They've met quite a bit in recent years on television, and this is just another chapter in it as both of them try to get their careers back online. But that's not one that I had on my list. I'll do like you did. I'll go one from each quarter, and I'll try to pick some different ones. I had the other three from the top quarter on mine. But I'll give special mention, since we're talking a lot about the Germans here, and this is in Germany, I'll go Martin Schindler against Stephen Bunting. Bunting hasn't been playing quite at his best in the last couple weeks after a month where he looked as good, if not better than ever. But he just didn't have it as much in the past Euro Tour event, didn't have his best game in the World Grand Prix. But I think overall his game is where it is better than it's ever been. And I think the confidence is there. But Schindler is coming off of that quarterfinal in the World Grand Prix. I think this is a very, very interesting first round tie, and one where if Bunting is going to break through and win a PDC major, it's going to be in the next couple months. It's not that he can't continue to play at this level, but I think you have to strike while the bullet is hot, while the bullet is firing, I should say. And right now it is. And this is an opportunity for him. From the second quarter, you said Cross Vandenberg. I had that on my list as well, but I like a couple of the other ones here. Aspinall Searle is always an interesting match. But I'm going to go the battle of the last two UK Open champions, Danny Noppert, Andrew Gilding. Noppert has been brilliant since the we'll call it the winter break, because they go to Australia and New Zealand. He didn't, obviously, in August, but the other people do. They're playing in what is their winter in August, so it's the winter break, have darts in winter. Since then, Noppert has been fantastic. I mentioned before the World Grand Prix that Gilding had regressed, but then he won a couple matches on the World Grand Prix stage. He's a difficult player to play against, but I think it's a matchup that could be very interesting, as Gilding has obviously brought the best of his game out on television this year, and Noppert has just been playing really well over the last month and a half. And then from the bottom the bottom half, I still have two quarters to go. I've lost track. The next quarter, I actually didn't have any of those matches on, so maybe that's why I didn't have Dirk Van Dijvenbode to James Wade. But just picking one to match you, I'll actually go Luke Humphries, Brendan Dolan. Dolan, of course, had that monumental win against MVG earlier this year in the World Match Play, but he hasn't had his best season otherwise, and that's why he's coming here as a 31st seed. Luke Humphries, this will be his first televised match since becoming major champion for the first time at the World Grand Prix. He was also brilliant in the European Tour this past weekend, but fell just short, losing that semifinal to Peter Wright. Had he won that match and had beaten Ricardo Pietreczko, he'd be the top seed. But just to see how he does as a major champion, I'm curious, especially against someone who knows how to beat major champions on the big stage. And then from the bottom quarter, I also had Ricardo Pietreczko, Ross Smith on here, the reigning European champion against the reigning European Tour tournament champion. But I'll go to be different. I'll go Damon Hedda against Jan van Veen. Van Veen is definitely gone a little bit quiet, relatively speaking, over the last few weeks. He's not been as consistent, at least, since earlier in this year, but he's still playing very well. Damon Hedda is finding his best game again. I think that could be a match where one of them averages 108 and loses 6-2. That's how good those two players are.
Definitely some exciting games to look forward to. We'll be back in a moment to continue our look back at the weekend and the Women's Series. But before we do, let's hear from one of the players that made some history at the weekend in Wigan. Here's our chat with the newest winner on the PDC Women's Series, Natalie Gilbert. I'm pleased to say I'm joined by the newest winner on the PDC Women's Series, Natalie Gilbert. Thanks for the time, Natalie. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Great to get you on, and it's not even been 24 hours since you beat Lorraine Winstanley to win the last event of this year's Women's Series. What have the last, 18 hours or so been like? Has the phone stopped pinging yet?
A whirlwind. The phone's been non-stop. My head's been non-stop. The smile is constant. It's an unbelievable feeling still.
Good to hear. And that win has seen you join a small list of players to have won a Women's Series title. You're the 10th player to win one of these events. What does that win mean to you?
I still can't describe the feeling, and especially to know it's such a small list. And if I'm being totally honest, it's a list I didn't think my name would be on. So to finally achieve, what I've doubted within myself for so long makes it even better.
And we've got to say as well, you mentioned it in your interview yesterday after winning the title, and we just spoke about it off air. You're off on holiday today, so where are you off to celebrate the big win?
I'm off to Northern Cyprus, actually to play darts for a few days, but there's holiday in between. It's a bit of both.
Brilliant. Well, we appreciate you fitting in some time with us before you fly out, and I know a lot of our listeners are going to be interested to hear more about your story and how you first got into darts. And you were saying yesterday that you discovered the game, started playing after you'd had a stroke, and it helped with your balance. Is that right?
Yeah. I had quite a big stroke back in 2000 and something, 2005. No, 2008. Sorry, 2008. And then ended up in a wheelchair, as I'd said. So during my physio process of the learning to get back on my feet again, found darts and I couldn't throw from sitting. So the lads used to help me stand and throw, and I really just enjoyed it. And physio found it would be a good way for you to learn how to balance on your feet again while doing stuff. So I continued. Just messing about really, and it went from there.
And before that, had you played any darts at all? Or
I'd never thrown a dart, never watched darts, didn't follow darts, nothing before. I played football before that, so darts wasn't a thing for me really, and then it became an obsession.
So you come from a sporting background then with the football. What position did you play on the pitch?
I was a defender. Wasn't very quick, but I had some weight behind me.
And was it just local teams? How far did you get with the football?
Yeah, no, just local teams. I played for Walsall Ladies for a good few seasons. Excellent.
So you then start playing darts. At what point do you think I'm going to pursue this further and join a team or start entering tournaments?
The joining a team came actually from the local pub, but they asked me to sign for their pub team, and then the manager from there suggested I join a Super League team, so I did that. So it was all progression really. I got selected from county from there, and had the pleasure of playing alongside Trina Gulliver for Warwickshire for a long time, and speaking through her and wanting to try tournaments, and I asked her some advice a few years back, and then just used to handpick a few of the BDO events back then. I'd said back then to test myself to see, what it was like to play amongst the elite, and the love just grew, and I continued.
And you mentioned one of the legends of the game there, Trina Gulliver. Another legend that you've got to speak to and get to know is Dita Hedman. And I was watching the documentary that Sky Sports filmed with Dita as part of Black History Month, Black Arrows, The Next Generation, looking at diversity in darts. And it was a really interesting watch. Did you get much feedback from it, from people after it was shown?
Yeah, quite a few people have said they watched it and they found it very interesting, and that we came across quite well. Because sometimes you don't. It's not really the first thing you think about when you talk about sports is how diverse the sport is, really. So, it's good to provide insight as to, that it's there for anyone wishing to come on board, really. Help grow the sport in all areas.
Definitely, and Dita, she's been a trailblazer for a long time. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely.
What do you think is going to help get more men and women from Afro-Caribbean backgrounds playing darts? Could it be successes like yours yesterday, seeing those clips on social media get more people involved?
Yeah, I think it has to start somewhere, don't you? You have to be seen, to see someone like you out there, like for me, seeing Dita and being, she's a Jamaican and my family come from Jamaica, so, it's nice to see you being represented somewhere. And I say that for my daughter. I mean, she sees me playing and she's not very interested in darts, but she'll pick a set up every now and again and say, and I know she goes to school and talks to her friends and says, her mum plays darts. And then children come to me and the parents come to me, I didn't know you played darts. I don't understand darts. And I was surprised to know how many people don't really understand the game either. So it definitely needs to be somehow put out there more, to know about the sport.
Definitely. Well, you're getting more eyes on the game, and let's get back to your career so far. And you've been a regular in these PDC women's events from the very start, going back to the World Championship qualifiers, and you came very close to getting a spot at Ali Pali a few years ago, losing out to Fallon in the final. Was it a tough defeat, or did you take a lot of positives from that run, getting so close?
I took a lot of positives from that, because I think I remember that day, and I know I was really surprised to have made it that far in the first place. So it's all positives, and I think throughout the years, I felt like I've learned so much in winning and losing. There's always a lot to be learned before the next event, the next game. So, yeah, definitely.
And looking back at last year, you made a lot of strides. You got to a final on the Women's Series. You also won the British Internationals with England. What did it mean to put on that England shirt and be part of that winning team?
So proud. An amazing achievement. One that I continue to tell to anyone that will listen about. So, yeah, big proud moment in my life.
And I guess for you, coming from a background playing football, being involved in a team side of it, that must transfer compared to when you're just playing on your own. You're representing the team.
Yeah, it is completely different. The feeling that you get, the pride that you get. You're not just playing for yourself, but you're playing as part of a team, representing your country. It's a big deal.
Well, let's get on to this year then. And you mentioned in your interview with the PDC yesterday about how you'd sadly lost your nan, who was a big part of your life. Did she also follow your darts closely as well?
No, unfortunately she didn't. And it was mainly down to the fact that she was completely deaf and I couldn't really follow anything, So it was just more, I'd share pictures. I don't know if she would never really fully understood what I was doing, so to speak, because she couldn't hear to know what was going on. But just in general, she supported us in anything we did, whether she was fully understanding of it or not.
Well, you did her proud yesterday with that title, and looking at the run, one early scare was against Adriana, 3-0 up, then 3-3, and you edged through in a last leg decider. And from the outside looking in, it seems like the pool of players in the Women's Series is growing, the list of names to look out for that can do some damage. Does it feel like the field is getting stronger year on year?
Definitely does. And I think it can only get bigger. There's women that are now only still just coming for the first time. We had a few first comers this weekend that I know of, and they've said that they'll definitely be back next year. So I think there's definitely more growth within the game. More women will definitely be coming through, which is going to make the field even more stronger than it already is.
Yeah, it's great to see it growing, and it's another last leg decider in the semi-finals against one of your good friends on the tour, Kirsty Hutchinson. You two wouldn't have known how events were playing out in that other semi-final between Bo and Lorraine, but did you both feel like that semi-final was a huge opportunity for both of you?
Yeah, I couldn't look any further than that game. Like you say, Kirsty's a good friend of mine. We travelled together and we roomed together when we were around. And I always find her a very tough opponent. She's a great player. So, yeah, my focus at the minute wasn't anywhere else but to try and finally come over the line against her. I've owed her that one for a long time.
Well, you edged that one 5-4, that 90 finish on double five, and then it's Lorraine in the final who gets the better of Bo in that other semi-final. So how are you feeling going into that final? Because the weekend had been dominated by Fallon and a lot of this year and last year by Bo. So was it hard to put the opportunity on offer to you to one side and treat it like any other game?
So I gave myself a little pep talk before that game, and it was just simply stay calm. I think I'd kind of told myself by that point that if I could just continue to be as calm as I have as throughout the day, then the darts will come themselves. I can't explain the mindset I had. It's nothing like normally. I'm shaky and panicky, and there was none of that. I felt like it was my time, and if I could remain calm, then there's no reason why I couldn't have given Lorraine a good game. We've had some good games in the past, and obviously you want to be triumphant at the end of it, and thankfully double 5 again.
Yeah, becoming your favourite double, I think, after yesterday, and you get past Lorraine 5-3. It was the last Women's Series event of this year. It's put you in the provisional field for the Women's World Match Play next year. Obviously, there's a lot of darts to play before that lineup is going to be confirmed. But what would it mean to you to make that walk at the Winter Gardens and play in that event?
Oh, that's on. I want to say it's on my list of things to do, but it's in pencil. It would be amazing because, like I say, it's obviously something we all aspire to do. That's what we're competing for these prizes at the end, so to speak. So yeah, it's definitely next on the list for what I would love to achieve.
And just lastly, still a few months left of this year to go, and when you come back from your holiday, you said you're going to be on the practice board to keep this momentum going. So have you got any other events lined up for the rest of the year to focus on before the Women's Series comes back?
Yeah, I'll be back doing a few of the WDF tours towards the end of the year. Definitely, I'll be in Malta and the Killarney Open. Yeah, apart from that, it's practicing, and county darts is still going, so there'll be stuff for me to keep my arm going.
Great to hear. Well, Natalie, it's a pleasure to get you on the show. Really appreciate you taking out the time, and congratulations again on the title yesterday, and enjoy your holiday and what else is to come for the rest of 2023 as well.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again to Natalie for joining us and continuing our look back at the weekend in the world of darts and to events in Wigan where the Women's Series came to a close for 2023 with the last 4 events, and 3 of them won by Fallon Sherrock, which secured her a spot in the Grand Slam, as well as an Ali Pali return, Mikuru Suzuki getting the other spot in the PDC World Championship. But in terms of who are the best ladies players in the world, have these 3 titles for Fallon turned that pendulum? Has it swung after the weekend?
I'm not ready to say it has. I mean, there's no question that this past weekend, the best player was Fallon Sherrock. That's why she won 3 titles. She won the first 3 events of the weekend before Natalie Gilbert won the 4th, and she beat Bo Greaves and Root on multiple of those. But overall, I don't think she's right now playing as well as Bo Greaves has over the course of the year. Let's look at the 3 titles that Fallon won. The first one, I think, she had some high levels of performance. We saw the nearly 95 in her last 16 match, averaged over 9 against Kirsi Venikainen, who we joked offline last week that Venikainen was still out around in the race to win. If she won all 4 titles and Fallon Sherrock didn't win more than 50 pounds across the 4 events, Kirsi Venikainen could catch Fallon Sherrock. And I joked that it was more likely that Kirsi won all 4. That Fallon only won 50 pounds, and it was that Kirsi won all 4. And Kirsi obviously had a very good run to make that semifinal. But in the end, Fallon was the better player. She won that to nil. She averaged 95, beating Vicky Prum to nil. But she didn't really have a tough draw at all in those matches. Then the next one, she had some tough draws. She went against Bo Greaves in the semifinal, beat her in a last leg decider 5-4. Earlier on, she beat Chloe O'Brien. She beat Mikuru Suzuki. She beat Kirchi Hutchinson. It was not an easy draw, but her performances weren't all that great. She was consistent. That's, the big thing going. Her lowest average was a tick over 79. Her highest average was 82.5. 7 consecutive matches within 3.5 points of each other. That's a good level of consistency. And it's just a little bit below her season average of 83.5. But not a single match where she reached her seasonal average even, let alone Bo Greaves' seasonal average. She managed to win the title, but she wasn't playing great. She was playing consistent, and that's important, but she wasn't playing great. And she wasn't lifting her game Usually to beat Bo Greaves, you're going to have to lift your game. You're going to have to play your best darts. She got 4-1 up on that. And instead of lifting her game, Bo Greaves went 18-14 to pull even, and then a 21 darter in the decider got Fallon Sherrock over the line. She limped over and fell over against Bo Greaves. She did win, but she fell over. If Bo Greaves was playing her best, Fallon Sherrock is lucky to get to nil in that match, averaging 81. Overall, I think Fallon Sherrock had a very good weekend. That's why she won 3 titles. But she didn't play great. She played good. She played consistent. She didn't really have a bad match. Her lowest average across the weekend was still 77. That's a very good bottom, but she never lifted her game. If she can play at this level of consistency and reach the heights that she has in the past, then she'll be back to being the best. If she can have a 5-point swing between her best and her worst, but that's in the high 80s, then she's doing what Bo Greaves does, but better, because Bo Greaves does have peaks and troughs. And that leaves her vulnerable if someone is playing well. Fallon Sherrock just was playing consistent. I think still Bo is the best player. It was not her best weekend. Bo was not even close to the best player this weekend. It was Fallon. But overall, the player to beat is still Bo Greaves.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. And just looking at how this last weekend of the year played out, and as we mentioned, Fallon winning the first 3 titles. You've just heard from the newest title winner, Natalie Gilbert. She won the other title. So it's a weekend where we've seen Bo Greaves not win any of the titles. And if you'd have predicted that before the start of the weekend, that Bo wouldn't win at least one of the titles, you'd have got long odds for that's for sure. But big reason why Bo didn't leave with a title was Fallon Sherrock. As you say, she beat Bo in 2 of the 4 events. The first meeting on Saturday, a nervy decider, winning it against Fro in 21 darts, the longest leg of the match. And Sunday, 5-3 win. I think it was a quarter-final, that one again, closing the deal against the Fro. And there were some good moments in those games from Fallon. I think that the first game there was a 107 in the first leg, and in the second game a 104 with Bo sat on a double. But there wasn't an awful lot between the two players. But I guess in terms of pressure going into this weekend, there would have been more on Fallon, because she went into the weekend with that aim of chasing down Mikuru Suzuki for that second spot on the order of merit to get the Grand Slam place. And she did that, winning those 3 titles to help her overhaul Suzuki and get that second spot, whereas Bo already had the Grand Slam wrapped up, a sizable lead at the top of the order of merit. But you get the feeling that I think those wins for Fallon and the consistency that she's starting to show, it is showing that her confidence is growing again. And I think off the back of the previous weekend of the Women's Series, which finished off with Fallon beating Bo in the final, it ended an awful long run of success for Bo against Fallon. You'd seen, I think it was 8 wins out of 8 Bo Greaves has had against Fallon Sherrock in the Women's Series since she came back to playing in these events last year. And included in those are some crucial games. I think there was 4 finals in there, and one of them, I seem to recall the end of last year, essentially it was for all the marbles. It was for that Ali Pali spot, and okay, things turned out differently. Both players ended up getting in, as we know, but back then that was a huge game for both players. But we saw Fallon snap that losing run with that win in the final on the previous weekend, and then to beat her 2 out of 2 this past weekend, 3 wins in a row. She is starting to build a bit of a streak of her own now, and you look at the averages for the season, for me it looks like they've got a bit closer together. I might be wrong in that, but I just get the feeling it is that way. Bo Greaves 85.58, Fallon Sherrock 83.69, so there's less than 2 points in it. It's still quite a decent gap between the two players. And I think, like you right now, if you put Fallon against Bo against each other on a stage or off it, I'm still backing Bo Greaves. I still think her resume over the last year, 18 months, warrants her still being that best ladies player in the world right now, despite having an off weekend, I guess, by her standards, not winning a title. But I think more weekends like the one we've just had, the success that Fallon's had winning those 3 titles, then the conversation does start to change, doesn't it? But we've still got the Grand Slam. Both players are going to be in that. Then it's going to be the World Championships. Bo's going to be trying to defend her Lakeside title. Fallon Sherrock, she's going to be going back to Ali Pali. So both players have still got a couple of chances before the year's out to show what they can do. And who knows, if one player goes on and has a really good 2 events from those 2 that they're playing in, we could go into next year with a different outlook. Who knows?
Now, before we go into next year, one more question on this year. Natalie Gilbert, as we mentioned, became the 3rd new winner of a women's series title this year. Who, though, do you fancy to join the Roll of Honor for the first time in 2024?
Well, I know we try and stay unbiased on this show, but I've got to say, first of all, and I know how gutted she was not to have been the one picking up her first women's series title at the weekend, but Kirsty Hutchinson's got to be high up on my list. And we've seen glimpses before of the high levels that she can reach. And I think back to that semi-final with Lisa Ashton last year, where Kirsty averaged 91, Lisa averaged 95, and she ended up losing that game. But we've also seen her go out losing early on with averages in the 60s. So I think we just talked about Fallon Sherrock and the consistency that she showed at the weekend. That's something that's been missing in Kirsty Hutchinson's game, which probably is one of the areas which is separating her from that very top elite group in the ladies game. But I think she's got that level to match and beat those top ladies. And we saw more of it this past weekend than we've probably done for a while. She had a quarter final on the Saturday and then back-to-back semi-finals on the Sunday. And I think particularly that last run, the last semi-final of the weekend, she really started to find that more consistent level, the high 70s into the low mid 80s every game for those last 4 games in that run. And it was a really tight game between her and Natalie Gilbert. Natalie taking it with a 90 finish, double 5 with her last start. And she did have chances to win the game early on, and Kirsty herself had a match start to win it as well. So a very close one that could have gone either way there. But I think Kirsty Hutchinson's time's going to come maybe next year if she can build on that weekend. I know it's a long way off before the women's series comes back, but aside from her, I think there's certainly a few other names that you've got to look at, and 2 players that made multiple finals this year didn't quite get over the line. I'm looking at the likes of Noeline van Leuven, Anastasia Dobromoslova, and particularly Noeline van Leuven. And I've got to give a shout out to a friend of the show, Colin, FEBS Data on Twitter, who does a lot of great work posting stats on Twitter. And he compared the averages from 2022 to 2023 on the women's series. And Noeline van Leuven has had by far the biggest improvement when you compare the 2 years. Last year, 68.17. This year, 77.04. So she's put almost 9 points on the averages, and it's helped her really make some strides this year. We've seen her in the women's world match play, made her debut in that, and she's been posting some big averages. She's had some 90 averages, some high 80s averages as well. And yeah, she was pretty close actually to winning that last event of the weekend, the quarter final. Just left herself too much to do against Natalie Gilbert, 4-0 down, got it back to 4-3 and some double trouble in that next leg. Could have made it 4-4. We might not be mentioning her in this question, and we could have had an interview with Noeline van Leuven. So I think she's going to be there or thereabouts next year as well. And just one other player as well, I'm actually surprised she's not won one of these titles yet, and that is Eileen de Graaf. She didn't make a final this year, I don't think, but her pedigree that she's got in the game, she's going to be in the mix again next year. I think she is someone that is going to get to a final next year and put herself in those positions. I would be surprised if we get to this time next year and we're not talking about Eileen de Graaf making finals or perhaps even winning one of these titles as well.
I think those are some good selections. I'll start with one of the ones you mentioned because I agree, and that's Noeline van Leuven. What more to say? I mean, she managed to do enough at the last weekend before the cutoff for the world match play to squeeze into the last spot, passing Lorraine Winstanley. She was the only person to make up ground and get in that final weekend. But she's kicked on since then, even outside the PDC. She made it to the semifinals of the WDF World Cup a few weeks ago in Denmark, going out in a fairly high quality affair to Bo Greaves. Bo did not play her best per se, but Noeline, when she was facing elimination 5-1 down, threw in her best leg, a 14 darter, and she was right there in the next leg to try to break back and keep it going. And Bo had to throw in a 15 darter herself to clinch the match 6-2. But still averaged nearly 80 in that, and we've seen her just keep adding on to her game and keep improving as she plays more of these. I think that title is coming. I think that title's coming next year. And I don't think it's just one. I think she is going to be one of those players who begins to emerge in that second tier. But I also want to give another name that we joked off air, and I mentioned that we joked off air last week about Kirsi Venikainen still being around to win, to qualify for the World Championships. So she won 4. But okay, she didn't win 4. She didn't win any, but she did make a semifinal. She did make another quarterfinal the following day. She did average in her last 11 matches above her season average in 9 of those. So she's playing at a much higher level, average 90 against the 3-time former world champion Anastasia Bromlesova in beating her 4 legs to 1. She beat Dita Hedman, averaging 84. She's playing much better. And on top of that was the other beaten semifinalist at the WDF World Cup a few weeks ago. She had a, relatively speaking, an easier draw, and she wasn't playing at this same level. She was averaging in the 60s most of the time there, but she didn't need to do any better. And in the end, she lost in a last leg decider. Brutal match that took 59 minutes against Dita Hedman, but she had chances to get to the finals. And what we saw this past weekend is she can lift her game when she needs to. I don't know if she would have beaten Bo Greaves. I don't think she would have beaten Bo Greaves, but Bo averaged 87 in that. And we saw that Kirsi Venikainen has the game, that she can do that herself. We learned that this past weekend. This past weekend, she improved significantly. And there were already signs early in the year that she was good enough. That's why she would still technically alive to qualify for the World Championships heading into this. She averaged in the 90s earlier this year in beating Mikura Suzuki. She's in fact beaten Suzuki 3 times this year. So she's been a player who can get results. I think, though, taking that next step is not that far off. So I'm going to throw her in. And I also had Aline de Graaf on my list, who you mentioned, but you said everything I was going to. So I'll leave it at that. But I'm sure there's going to be someone else who we're not even thinking about, who we see next year and just blows us all away.
Those are our early predictions for the Women's Series next year. Let us know who you think could be winning titles next year that we've not seen win them before, and it could be our next guest on the show. She made her first final on the Women's Series at the weekend in her first year playing on the circuit. Here's our chat with Aoife McCormack. I'm pleased to say I'm joined by one of the newest first-time finalists on the PDC Women's Series, Aoife McCormack. Thanks for the time, Aoife. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks, Alex, for having me.
Great to have you on, and we're talking only a few days on from that first final on the Women's Series, event 22 on Saturday. How do you reflect now on what was your best run so far on the Women's Series?
Yeah, I was delighted to have gotten to a final in my first year on the Women's Series. I wasn't expecting to do so well my first year, and I was just going over just to get the experience, and I wasn't expecting to get that far.
Yeah, you mentioned this your first year playing on the Women's Series, so I'm guessing that final at the weekend caps off what's been a successful first year for you. How do you look back on the year as a whole?
Yeah, I was delighted I took the chance and went and done the Women's Series, and playing against such top players is tough and a big adjustment, but I'm delighted I went and delighted with how the year went.
And as this is the first time we've had you on the show, let's circle back to the very beginning for you in darts. Where did it all begin for you, and how did you get introduced to the game?
Well, my dad would have always played darts, and he used to play at home with his cousin, and me and my brother used to sit in the kitchen watching him play, and we thought it looked fun. So we decided then to start throwing, and yeah, that was it really.
And we've seen over the years as well, a lot of top players have come from Ireland. The ladies scene, that's been growing too, with Robin Byrne, Katie Sheldon leading the way. So what inspired you to follow in their footsteps and start entering tournaments as well?
Yeah, I went for the Irish team when I was 13 or 14, and I made the team then that year, and I loved it so much, so I just decided to keep going.
Good to hear. And in terms of a sporting background then, is darts the first sport you've been involved in, or did you do any other sports growing up?
Growing up in school, I would have played camogie and football, but I didn't really do that well at them, so I decided then to start playing darts because my dad was doing it, and just loved it ever since.
Well, you're certainly making a name for yourself, and it's towards the end of 2022 we start to see your name crop up in the deep end of some of the women's events, the quarterfinals of the Northern Ireland Open, then the semi-finals of the Killarney Open. What were those first experiences like, playing in those sort of events and going up against some of the established names as well?
Oh, it was when I went up the first time, I wasn't expecting to get that far in a tournament with such top players. After seeing them play on TV and all when I was younger, I was amazed and kind of starstruck when I first went up.
And at the start of this year then you had another semi-final, this time out in Romania. Then you make that debut on the Women's Series in February. How did you find the switch from, I guess, local events, the WDF events, to then playing in the PDC events? Because a lot of the ladies that we've spoke to, they've said about how professional the PDC setup is. It kind of mirrors what the Players' Championship events are like as well.
Oh, the difference is huge, and the PDC, it's so professionally run and just so much better than any other tournament I've ever been to. Everything is on time and the setup is just amazing.
And a quarter-final in the second weekend of the season. A few days later it's announced that you've signed with Target, their latest sign-in. How did that come about, joining Target, and how much of a support have they been for you so far?
Well, Lorraine Winstanley contacted me, and she offered the sponsorship by Target, and obviously I wasn't going to say no to that. They're just an amazing company, and I already have my new set of darts now, and they're going so great for me, and they're just so fast and quick, and the equipment is brilliant.
And how much of a boost was it to get the support of Target behind you as well, so early on in your darts career, a manufacturer like that spotting your talent and lending their support to you when you're still very much in the early days of your career?
Oh, it's just brilliant. I wasn't expecting to ever get such a big sponsorship, and they're so supportive and they're just brilliant.
Well, the milestones, they keep coming. A first semi-final on the Women's Series in July. We're seeing the averages creep up as well, hitting some mid-80s in some of the games. Did that come from just more time on the practice board, getting used to the surroundings, or a mixture of both?
Yeah, in the first few events of the Women's Series, I was very nervous and just couldn't really get used to it. But then after a while, I started to calm down a bit and I started enjoying it more, and I just feel more comfortable now and just doing a lot more practice than I was.
And away from the board as well, we read that you work in your local convenience store in your village in Ballingarry. Is it tough juggling the darts with work, or do you have a nice balance at the moment?
No, Marie and Martin, the people who own the shop, they're very supportive, and any day I want off, they'll let me take it, and they're just very supportive and helping me the whole way through, and couldn't ask for a better job, really.
That's great to hear. And fast forward to just a few weeks ago now, the WDF World Cup out in Denmark, where you were part of that Irish women's team that won the team event. You hit the winning double in the final as well. What was that moment like, securing the gold medal for your country?
Oh, it was absolutely amazing. It was my first year at the World Cup and first year playing in the women's, and to have such a great team as well, Robin, Katie, Caroline, it was just a great experience, and I was delighted to be able to hit the winning double.
Good times. And then we come on to the weekend just gone in Wigan on the Women's Series, a first final for you, as we mentioned, and I've got to touch on the semi-final against Anastasia Dobromoslova, 4-all. You throw a 180 to leave 59, then take it out for that 15 darter in the last leg. Was that the best win of your career so far?
Yeah, it definitely was. One of my favourite games anyway. Very nerve-wracking in the last leg, but I got there in the end anyway, and I was delighted to have beaten her. She's such an amazing thrower and always an idol of mine when I was younger, so it was great to even be able to play her in the Women's Series.
Definitely, and I'm guessing as well, you look at the Women's Series now, it is the place where you're getting all of the top ladies players turning up every weekend. So for you, going up against these ladies, and there's probably a list of them that you've beaten so far, some of them that you've not been able to get one over yet, but when you're ticking off those players that you've beaten, how much confidence is each one of those wins giving you as well?
Oh, it's unbelievable to be even getting the chance to play these players, and even just beating them, like, it's just unbelievable.
And we know these weekends as well, they're pretty busy, pretty full on. You've got 2 events on the Saturday, 2 on the Sunday, and I think between the semi-final and the final you had about 11 minutes. So was it good in a way that you didn't have much time to think about it, or would you have preferred a bit more time to let that moment sink in?
In a way, I think it was good because I didn't have much time to think about the fact I was in the final, so I didn't really let my nerves get to me, and I was kind of able to keep a rhythm going then since my last game, and I wasn't waiting around too long.
Definitely, and your opponent in the final, Fallon Sherrick, she was on a bit of a roll at the weekend, winning 3 of the 4 titles. She gets the better of you in the final, but how much did you take away from that run, the experience of getting to a final on the Women's Series?
Oh, it was just a great experience to get that far. I didn't think I'd ever get that far in a Women's Series this year, especially because it's my first year, and I was just delighted. And
as I mentioned, that was the last Women's Series weekend of the year, so have you got much else on darts-wise for the rest of 2023? I assume the Irish Open, that's going to be high up on your list in a month's time?
Yeah, I think that's the only big one now I have left for this year, and maybe just a few more local tournaments and just then practice, really.
And lastly, before we let you go, we saw from your social media your partner is the PDC tour card holder Steve Lennon. Do you guys practice much together, and if so, who's got the bragging rights on the dartboard at the moment?
Yeah, we would do a good bit of practice now, and just mostly a few hours here and there, but he'd usually slaughter me off the board anyway, so yeah, well, I say I have bragging rights at the moment, for now anyway.
Definitely, yeah, with that run to the final. Well, Aoife, it's a pleasure to get you on the show. We appreciate you taking out some time, and wish you all the best for what else is to come in 2023 as well.
Thanks a million for having me, Alex.
Thanks again to Aoife for joining us. Now finish up the show with the mailbag, and we've got quite a full one this week. Let's get straight to it. The first one comes from JPY_1975. He says, if Peter Wright has a bad end of year, that's 5 players from the Premier League in 2021 gone: Wright, Anderson, Wade, De Souza and Durrant. So who's your predicted lineup next year, and how do you make the Premier League interesting again?
Yeah, it's a tough question because we don't yet know exactly what the format's going to be next year. We do know that the Premier League is starting before the Masters, so it seems like the thing from the last few years where the Masters champion gets the last spot is a thing no more, which is a bit of a shame because all 3 of those Masters champions acquitted themselves well. Obviously, most famously Johnny Clayton, but also, Joe Cullen, who made it to the final, and Chris Dobie, who won the first night this past year and played really well. And actually, I think became a better dart player from the experience of playing in the Premier League. So it seems like it's something that worked, and I don't understand changing that. But I do think that the Premier League needs to be mixed up. I do think the format from the last 2 years of the 8 players playing a tournament each night has run its course, at least for now, and maybe going back to 10 players or 9 players in a challenger is the way to go. Maybe it's something where keep it at 8 players, but play slightly longer matches, no relegation, but a league stage again. Maybe there's something we haven't even thought about. Maybe even 2 different groups, and then have the group winners play at the end of the year, first and second in each group. I don't know, but that seems like it's getting a little redundant. But something will need to be different from this past year. As far as who's the players, I think obviously right now, Michael Smith, Michael Van Guren, Guren Price and Luke Humphreys are all but guaranteed. And I should add as well, the World Match Play champion, Nathan Aspinall. Those are the players who are the top 5 in the post-World Championship ratings as things currently stand. Beyond that, who gets the rest? I think Johnny Clayton is still in. I'm going to go based on it being 8 again, because that's what it was this past year. I think Johnny Clayton is still in, even though he hasn't had the same televised success this year because he's just done so well in the Premier League. And that leaves 2 spots. Who are those 2 right now? Ooh, it's tough. It's really wide open. I think Dave Chisnell's in that conversation. I think Dirk van Dijvenbode is in that conversation. I think Joe Cullen is in that conversation as he's had a lot of deep TV runs. I think even Andrew Gilding, if he has another big television run, is in that conversation. I'm not going to actually pick them yet because we don't know the format, but it's 6 and then two others that are still to play for, and I'm going to leave it at that.
Yeah, I think we start this debate earlier every year, don't we? But I'm similar to you. I think the top four in the world, if that's how it's going to be, automatically get in. Then you're looking at Michael Smith, Michael Van Gerwen, Luke Humphries and Nathan Aspinall. That's the provisional top four after the World Championship. And I think regardless of where they are in the rankings, those four are going to be in the Premier League next year. You mentioned Gerwyn Price. I think he's fifth on that post-World Championship list. I think he's a certainty to be there as well. And then, like you, it leaves 3 spots if it is 8 players again. And you mentioned Andrew Gilding. I'd love to see the UK Open champion get in, but I think being realistic, he is going to need maybe another major title, maybe a run to a final, a World Championship final or Grand Slam final. That might just get him in there, but I think he's someone that's a bit like Danny Noppert last year, an unfancied player, I guess, for an 8-player Premier League lineup. He is going to need some more runs between now and the end of the World Championship. But I think those other 3 spots are up for grabs, and we've got 4 majors left before the end of the season. A few players that you mentioned there: Johnny Clayton, Dirk van Dijvenbode, Dave Chisnall, Joe Cullen. Put in Rob Cross, Damon Heta, Dimitri van der Berg, Peter Wright, Chris Dobie, Josh Rock, Gabriel Clemens, Ricardo Pietreczko, Gary Anderson. I'm rattling off names now, but I think we've got 5 definites. The other 3 I'm going to leave as TBC for now. I really don't know who's going to get in, which makes it quite an interesting subplot to follow. And as far as the format, I'd go back to 10 players with relegation. I think we probably all moaned about that format a few years ago, but for the viewer at home, I think it is a much better format than the current one. And the Premier League at the moment, it is aimed towards the fan in the venue, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But for us watching, you can see why it's not going to be winning our tournament of the year at the end of the year.
I think there's many reasons it's not going to win our tournament of the year. Our next question, I think, this might be the quickest we ever answer a question based on our conversation off air, but from Nathan Barrington: who is your favorite Pokemon character?
Yeah, good to have the questions back from Nathan this week. And I'm guessing this question does stem from the weekend and Ricardo Pietreczko, to give him his full name with a nickname there, winning the Euro Tour. He does walk out to the Pokemon theme music. His flights and shirt, they've got that theme as well. And if you heard our chat with Ricardo on the show earlier this year, I think it was around April time, the birth of the Pikachu nickname doesn't actually come from him being a fan of Pokemon. So if you missed that, do go and have a listen back to find out where that nickname came from. And I've got to say, as a kid growing up in the 90s, early 2000s, Pokemon was massive in our school. I was a fan as well, but I'm struggling to remember the names of all of them. So without wanting to upset anyone, I'm going to play it safe and say Pikachu's my favourite one, because he's probably the most popular, and he's a name that we're going to be hearing in the darts world quite a lot over the coming months, that's for sure.
Yeah, the only Pokemon I remember are the ones that have appeared in Super Smash Brothers. Pikachu's appeared since the very first Super Smash Brothers on the Nintendo 64. I usually played as Kirby at the N64 version, not Pikachu, but I do remember Pikachu's lightning being hell to deal with. So when I was playing with him, Pikachu, when I was playing against him, any definitely not Pikachu. But I'll go Pikachu, not just because he won, but because I remember him from Super Smash Brothers.
Next question comes from Charlie Lane, who says, how far can Ricardo go in the sport after that clinic on the Euro Tour? Obviously, consistency is key, but he showed world-class levels to beat MVG and Wright.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, and I'll stick mostly to what I said when we were talking about who will be the first German player to reach a PDC major. I am not picking Pietreczko to do that, but I think he has the ability to it. That nerve that he showed, that confidence in himself. Usually he just went up and hit, but ahead of those big shots, ahead of a big darted double, he stepped back like Rob Cross would and made sure he was ready, and then went, and it was always bang in the middle. That was really what was impressive. And if he has that bottle now, when he's never been in that position, where is it going to take him when he has experience under his belt, when he is learned even more how to bring out the best in himself and beat the best players. I don't know where he's going to go, but I don't think we've seen the best of him. I think there is more gears there. And as he continues to play more, and as he continues to play in bigger and more important events, we're going to see him lift his game even further. So I don't know how far he can go, because I don't think we've seen enough yet to answer that. But I think it's a lot further than he's gone already. And already he's a European champion.
Yeah, I've got to say, first of all, I think Charlie's spot on in his words that he's using in that question, saying that Ricardo Pietreczko put on a clinic at the weekend. That is certainly the phrase I'd use. It was very impressive stuff. And got to say, the MC for the Euro Tour, Philip, said it on stage when he was interviewing Ricardo after the final, something along the lines of, once you've won one of these titles, you've proven to yourself that you can do it. You can go on and do it again. And as we said earlier, it's not just winning the title, but the way he did it. He didn't fall over the line. He didn't survive loads of match darts. He raced home in that final 8 out of 8 on the doubles. And as we mentioned, the semi-final, that deciding leg, a 10-darter against Fro, to be a player that for a long time was unbeatable in these Euro Tour deciders, Michael van Gerwen. These are traits of a player that has got what it takes to go far in the game. And over these next few months, we are going to see what Ricardo Pietreczko is made of and how he copes with that. There's going to be added expectations, but also playing in a lot of these major events for the first time, like the Grand Slam, like the World Championship. He's not even played in the World Championship yet, but if we can look at what he did at the weekend, he didn't seem flustered at all on that stage. And Sunday night, he looked like the calmest person there. And if he can maintain that, I think he can go far. I think top 32, given all the events he's going to be in for the next 12 months, that seems like a safe benchmark to put in there. Top 16, I think we're going to need to see him produce it on a TV stage. And if he can do that, then, yeah, we could be looking at a German player in the top 16, and it could be Ricardo Pietreczko.
Now, our next question comes from Daniel Redfern, and that is, was the 2023 season the best Euro Tour season yet?
Oh, yeah, I think it's right up there, and just capped off with Ricardo's win on Sunday. But we also had a few other classic finals. I think back to the Dave Chisnall, Luke Humphries final in Budapest not so long ago. Luke and Dirk van Dijvenbode in Germany, they had a really close final, and they're a few of the recent memories that stick out for me. Also, we've got to mention a Rob Cross appreciation minute, him finally winning his first Euro Tour title after getting to so many finals. So, yeah, there's been some good moments this year. For me, last year's felt pretty special, partly because after the 2 years of a very quiet Euro Tour, it was the first year back to normal with that full quota of events. And again, some very special moments. That Luke Humphries, Roby John Rodriguez final, one of the matches of the year, got quite a lot of nominations from our listeners for that. And very early on, I think it was the first Euro Tour of the year, going Price, Peter Wright, battling it out, and the world number one ranking was on the line in that game, and both players averaged 105, 106. It was a thrilling game. But looking further back, as a Peter Wright fan, I've got to give a nod to 2017, don't I? Because he won 5 titles that year, including a 6-0 against MVG in one of the finals. So that's always going to be a special year for me. And I'll confess now, I didn't catch many of the early years of the Euro Tour, so I might be discounting some early contenders for this question. But I think overall these last 2 years, the Euro Tour, it's hit some new heights, I've got to say. And I think 2023, 2022, I'd put them side by side at the moment. Maybe this is a question for Dan Dawson, because I hear he is quite fond of the Euro Tour, but that might just be a rumour.
Best tour in darts. Yeah, I think there's an argument to be made for this year, just because you look, Gerwyn Price won back-to-back. Dave Chisnall managed to win 2 of the next 10. But other than that, you go from event 3 through event 11, 9 events, 9 different champions. Gerwyn Price, Michael Smith, Johnny Clayton, Dave Chisnall, Michael van Gerwen, Peter Wright, Rob Cross, Luke Humphries, Christoph Ratajski. And it's not just that it was 9 events, 9 different champions, but in many ways, that's a who's who in world darts right now. Dave Chisnall, of course, broke that by winning his 3rd event of the year. And then Ricardo Pietreczko comes through in the next one. And so we enter next year at least with 7 different winners in the last 7 events. That's pretty darn impressive. Just that diversity of champions, and the fact that most of those finals were really good finals. also adds into it. But I do want to give a shout out for one previous Euro Tour season, and that's because it was the one where Mensur Suljovic finally broke through and won his first title. That's really the only thing worth remembering from the 2016 season. Well, there's one other thing. That brilliant run by Kyle Anderson to the semifinals, beating MVG, one of the only people to beat MVG all year, with those 3 bullseye finishes. The late Kyle Anderson, one of his now forgotten best moments, came during that 2016 season. But the big thing that year was Mensur Suljovic finally breaking through in Riesa and winning the International Darts Open after Kim Huybrechts missed 5-match darts in the decider. Nearly made it 2 in as many weeks the following week in a brilliant final against MVG. But I think another thing to remember is that nearly half of those finals went to a last leg decider. Actually, was half of them that year that went to a last leg decider. It was a really tough year to win a European Tour title. A lot of good finals. But again, Mensur, after 11 losing semifinals, breaking through. I'll say 2016 was also in that conversation.
And our last listener question for this week comes from Tristan. He says, when was the last time Alex or Burton went to the floor like Ricardo after winning the title?
I think I went to the floor after missing double 18 for a 156 out for a 15 darter once, but I missed, and then I don't remember how many more darts it took me to finish. That might have been the last time. That time, sorry, 153, not a 156. At that time, it would have been my first ever 15 darter. So this was years ago, and I was so disappointed that I missed. I've since had a few 15s and even a 14, and I did not go to the floor. I just scared the bar by yelling when I hit that double for a 14. But that's probably the last time I went to the floor like that.
Yeah, I can't say I've ever fallen to the floor like Ricardo did on Sunday night when he won the Euro Tour. And I think if I ever won a big game or a big title relative to my level, I should add, I'm more likely to pull out the crane celebration in homage to the GOAT Ko Stompe. And last year, we should have seen the crane back on our screens. Dave Parletti did promise me earlier in the day before his first round game at Lakeside that if he did win, he would pull out the crane celebration. And the great man Ko was at Lakeside that night as well. But I think it was just the excitement of winning made him forget to do it. But rest assured, if I ever get in that position, you're definitely going to see the crane from me. And then I will drop to the floor and probably wake up because it'll have been a dream as well.
Anything else for this week?
As always, we've got to say a big thank you to our guests for joining us, to Aoife and Natalie, and shout out to Natalie as well. She called in just before flying out on holiday. She just got through security at the airport, so made some time for us, which we appreciate the commitment to the show. Thanks to her and her manager, Will Adamson, as well, for his help too. And thank you to Darts Corner for their continued support of the show. They are the world's #1 online darts retailer, dartscorner.co.uk or dartscorner.com. Trust me when I say there's some exciting stuff coming soon on their site, so definitely worth checking them out. Thanks to Condor as well for sponsoring our question of the week. Still time to vote on that on Twitter, on our social media channels. Have your say. And lastly, thank you to everyone for listening. We appreciate the support. We'll be back next week. We'll have a look back at the Pro Tours, which start on Wednesday today when you're listening to this. That's why we're dropping the episode a little earlier than usual, but we'll have a full preview of the European Championship next week. So until then, the darts is about to begin. It might have already started, so there's only one thing to do, and that is enjoy the darts.
Yes, I don't have time to say hang tight because of the quick turnaround. But yeah, we'll be back next week, recap those Players' Championship events and everything else. It is a sexy month, as I like to say, as you said, I like to say, and it's as sexy as a European Championship as ever. So we have to get ready for that. Until then, just keep enjoying the darts. That's all you can do in October.